welcome to today's Human Capital Watch for July 2018. I'm really glad to be able to share with you today some highlights from our recently released research on what's the role of human resources in digital transformation. And just to give you an idea of where we're headed today, we are going to answer the following questions, and you'll hear from my colleague who will introduce in a moment from Assurant and learn from their experience. But first of all, we're interested in this research and how long-established large global organizations like Assurant and like most of the Conference Board's members can make the transition to become more agile and to succeed in the digital economy. We're interested in how you transform your organization's leaders to be able to adapt and succeed and flourish in this new environment. Underlying that, of course, is what's HR's role. And then finally, I think what you're going to be hearing throughout the webcast are some lessons that we can all take from the experience of Assurant. I want to just tell you briefly about the opportunity to get continuing education credit. The critical things for you to remember are that you need to stay on for the full webcast. And secondly, that you can only get this credit if you participate in the live form of this webcast. So you'll see we have 3 different versions of continuing education credits that you can get. So now I would like to introduce my guest, who is Carrie Bongard, Senior Vice President of Global Talent Management and Development for Assurant. And if you're not familiar with Assurant, she'll be telling us more about that. But I want to say that I first met Carrie and heard her last January when she presented at our Digital Workplace Conference, and I thought, wow, what a great story. And also, I really want to interview her for our research. So we developed, as part of our new report on digital transformation, what's the role of HR, we did a separate case study about Assurant, and Carrie will be sharing highlights from that. And I am really grateful that she can be here and join us for the webcast and also be here in the studio. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you very much, Mary. Glad to be here.
So just as background, I wanted to sort of level the playing field and give everybody a common understanding of what we mean by digital transformation. Because even though this is probably one of the leading trends in business today, it's something that many people are still learning about and often have some misunderstanding of. So on the left-hand side, you can see an example or list of some of the kinds of digital technology that are transforming the entire world, not just companies or business. But they alone do not give you digital transformation. It's not just about the technology. It's about what companies do with that technology. It's about that technology's impact on customers, on industries, on companies' business models, etc. So here are the additional elements of digital transformation besides the technology. It's about the connections. It could be between pieces of equipment. It could be between organizations, between people that have never been possible before to the extent that digital technology enables them. It's about the masses of data that those connections generate and the insights that companies can extract from that data and use either as an input to their own products and services, or even as something that they can sell to others. And then thirdly, it's about the digital strategy that companies developed. And you're going to hear about how Assurant did that in order to leverage all these capabilities. So that's what we mean by digital transformation. When we began a series of 4 research reports on this topic, I thought about how do you capture this in a single graphic? And so I thought this is really what we're talking about here is the ripple effect. In the center, you'll see those 4 elements of digital transformation. And then in the next ripple out, you'll see some of its business impacts. Things like much more collaboration within the organization, because those connections enable more collaboration, but also with outside partners. I talk about here about the organizational boundaries blurring. Instead of just holding all the resources and capabilities internally, companies need to be able to exploit, leverage, partner with some of the capabilities externally from partners or from other sources because no large, mature, digital immigrant company can quickly enough develop all those capabilities inside. So a few other of the business impacts of digital transformation is with this data, there can be much more customization, much closer relationships with your customers. So you're monitoring, you're engaging them perhaps in innovations, you're getting them to test your agile iterations of new products and services and ways of operating. There's more democratization in that expertise isn't just held at the top of the organization, but in fact, you're through technology and giving people access to data, you're actually enabling people throughout the organization. So those are just some of the business impacts. And if you want to read more about those, I'll give you a link to that, to our earlier report towards the end of this presentation. But I just want to wrap up by saying the digital transformation actually impacts every corporate function. Here at the Conference Board, we have councils in each of these areas, and I've been interested that even though this research originated in our human capital practice, that actually I've had invitations from councils in each of these other functional areas who've wanted to understand digital transformation better and its impacts on their function. But today, what we're going to focus on is what does this mean for the role of HR? And for that purpose, I'm really glad to introduce Carrie, who's going to walk us through what was Assurant's situation at the beginning, what was happening in its industry, what was changing with its customers, and what did this mean for Assurant's business strategy, and then walk us through some of their experiences as they underwent digital transformation. So Carrie, over to you.
Great, thanks, Mary. Some of you might be familiar with Assurant, and I thought just a couple of words in case you're not. Assurant is a Fortune 500 company that you might not be familiar with because we're largely a B2B company. We partner with banks, financial institutions, property management companies, insurance companies, OEMs, retailers, and more around the world. And we work with them to help make sure their customers' lives keep running smoothly in such areas as keeping mobile devices running smoothly, protecting autos, homes, and apartments. And so through our clients, we have about 300 million consumers that we help protect around the world. And as you can imagine, even by looking at this slide, about everything about this suggests digital is really important. And so digital is critical for us, and digital transformation as well. To Mary's point about, so what was happening? When you think about it, many companies began their digital transformations maybe more than 10 years ago. But I'd say truly researching customer behavior, mapping the customer journey, and understanding the digital touch points is relatively new, I'd say in the last 5 years. And we recognize the need to do that. And what we did at that time too, we thought about, so what's happening inside of Assurant? And really by about 2014, our now Chief Digital Officer captured it in this way. He thought about what is digital maturity, what is digital immaturity, and where are we? And for Assurant, we really realized that while by 2014, protecting consumers' increasingly connected lives from disruption was really a big part of our business, we also recognized that in a heavily connected business, we had to think much more broadly about digital transformation for us. So it moved from just protecting digital and mobile devices, for example, but we really had to improve the digital experience, not only for those consumers, but everybody who really touched us. And so again, our Chief Digital Officer thought about it in this way. If you look at the left side of the slide, representing more digital immaturity, we see that as being more informational through digital platforms, managing transactions much more effectively and efficiently. Those are important, but really seen as the foundation. We'd say we're right in the middle of this journey now, and probably leaning more towards the right-hand side of this is really thinking about how do we build capabilities across Assurant, across multiple lines of business, leveraging some of that key functionality, and moving toward making that customer journey more contextual, if you will, more relevant to what's happening for them and where they are, and continuing to make that easier, leveraging more interfaces and other emerging technology. So that's kind of where we've seen the journey.
So tell us more about what were the drivers for Assurant?
So if I think about the drivers, this clearly was one of them. And so as we thought about it from a business perspective, our senior leadership said, so then what do we need to do from a people perspective to make this happen? And so we thought it was really important that we do a reality check. As we began to understand more about what that meant for us, we really had to think about where might we be strong and where do we need to get much stronger. And as we did that reality check, and we were pretty honest and candid with ourselves, we really identified these 4 areas that we needed to do some work around. We really had to think about where do we have the right talent to enable and drive this digital transformation? Where was the mindset in place for it, and where did we need to change that? Where did we really have digital capabilities from a functional, from a data perspective? And where did we have credibility as a digital company? And where do we really need to make that grow?
So I'm noticing that at least the first 2 things are very central to HR.
Yes.
And conceivably in terms of digital capabilities, that also spills over there, and perhaps even credibility. So anyway, I just want to underscore that, because in the past, in some organizations, what's happened is the C-level suite has crafted the business strategy, and then there's a kind of handoff to HR.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'm seeing here that the digital strategy, which was partly to close these gaps, put HR in a very central position.
Yes, yes. So I would say there were a number of things that we decided to do at that time. We had something at Assurant called the Growth Council that was really about innovating and R&D. We had a number of business leaders and product leaders who were trying and experimenting with new products, services, and ways of delivering it. But to your point, the CEO of this particular business really said, I need our senior leaders to really get immersed in this, because if we don't better understand it, we're not going to be able to make the right decisions, the right trade-off decisions to really drive this transformation throughout the organization. And so he and I talked about, so what might we do to make that happen? And there were some more traditional kinds of things that we talked about, but we decided to do something which we thought was pretty unique, and it was to create an advisory board that included both internal senior leaders at Assurant as well as some external experts who could help us get smarter, faster in the world of digital transformation.
Yeah, so to me, this is one of the really exciting parts of your story, but I want to underscore something you just said. We're seeing in other companies the need to create a structure at the top of the organization. It could be an advisory group, it could be a team of digital leaders who are guiding the digitization of the entire company. But what is interesting to me is the way you also incorporated external expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about that.
Great. So a picture can be helpful. So as we thought about this advisory board, I mentioned we wanted external members as well as internal members. So internally we get exposed and learn fast in a way we hadn't learned before. And externally we bring some expertise into the organization that we may not be able to afford. And so these external experts were sourced for us through a company called Global Executive Group, GXG, who also facilitated our board meetings. And so we talked about what are some of the areas of expertise that we don't have and that we need more of. And they sourced experts in these areas to be part of our first digital advisory board now about 5 years ago.
So that's a great example of the way digital transformation enables networks, external networks,
yes,
connecting people who aren't part of the organization and tapping into them.
Yes. You know, we have a phrase inside of Assurant that we use, and it is this a situation that suggests we should build, we should buy, or we should buddy? And that's really becoming a great question and way of thinking about things, whether it's related to something like the advisory board, or either building or buying a system, or building or buying a capability through an acquisition or an investment. And so it's really become a way of thinking very differently about what we do.
Can you say a little bit more about the kind of composition of this group? What were some of the kinds of expertise that it brought that you didn't have internally?
Sure. So as we sourced and staffed for these external positions, we looked at all different kinds of industries, from clothing and fashion to food to automobile manufacturers. And so we had a very diverse group of people, both in terms of their expertise as well as the industry experience that they had. And we thought that too was a really powerful example that we all can learn from others, whether they are in like roles, very different roles, like industries, or very different industries. And I think it was this powerful combination that really made a difference. We also wanted to make it a real learning experience for the board members. They were coming to us, giving their time and talent, and we also wanted to make sure that they learned something through the process.
So by board, just to clarify, you don't mean your corporate board, but rather your digital advisory board.
Correct, our digital advisory board, yes. Not our corporate board. This is very specific to this advisory board. We wanted to make it a really good learning experience for them.
Great.
So on the flip side of the external board positions, we also were really thoughtful about, so in this first year, who from inside of Assurant should be on it. And the CEO of that particular business, as well as many members of the C-suite, including me, were members of that board. And we thought it was really important that we get immersed in this, and again, so we can make better decisions about what we do or don't do, the talent we hire or engage with or don't. And it turned out to be a really great learning experience for us individually as well as collectively.
So why was it important, or how did Assurant benefit by having you as CHRO of this business be part of the digital advisory board?
I think we were really clear at the beginning that this is not just a business strategy challenge. It really is a way to think about our people and culture differently. And so while I would say all of us felt a responsibility around that, I was asked to make sure that we're really building some of the capabilities, things that others can leverage to make that happen.
And for you personally as a professional, in what ways was this a developmental experience for you too?
Well, it was a stretch in a number of different ways. While I knew some about our digital transformation and I knew that some of the acronyms meant, getting immersed in this helped me get smart about that, smarter, I guess I should say, smarter about that much more quickly. So from a technical knowledge perspective and the ability to engage with other members of this advisory board, as well as people inside the organization, I felt like I could speak more intelligently about what we were trying to do. And then I was able to translate that, directly into some of the people strategies that could go along with this.
I would think, you can tell me whether this is true or not, that being sort of in sync with the rest of the executive team, learning simultaneously with them rather than playing catch up later, was really an advantage in terms of giving you credibility going forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think it set up and strengthened, while we in HR might think that we can coach and we can advise and we can help influence business leaders, it was also really interesting because many of them had really great ideas about what we could do from a people strategy perspective, and it gave us the forum to talk about that together. So that I was not solo creating in this, I had a lot of input from them, which created alignment from the very beginning, which was great.
It almost sounds like a model that could be very effective in all strategy development, not just digital.
Right. Yes, I think you're right.
But it seems like maybe I'm asking you, because digital transformation was new, it sort of gave you a way to start over as an organization and start fresh in terms of thinking who needs to be involved here.
I think you're right. And while this started with the C-suite leaders, and I'd say initially people were thinking, oh, I've heard something about this digital advisory board. That sounds sort of interesting, but you know what? I don't have time for one more meeting. And what happened after we had several of these meetings, buzz started because we were talking about what we learned. We were talking about some of these external experts that we were learning from. And it started to become, how can I learn more about that? Is there a way for me to participate in it, deeper in the organization? And so we started doing some forums associated with this that might bring people in to say, test a presentation they were doing to a client, or that we had some of the digital advisory board members, for example, do a panel at one of our town hall meetings so that we gave access to other employees to this and to this learning. So it wasn't something that happened very far away. We tried to bring it a little bit closer to home. And I think that was really helpful. I think it signaled, digital transformation is really everybody's responsibility to learn more about and to think about how you might do things differently to be able to accelerate our success in that journey.
So that sort of speaks to the democratization, where it's not just the organizational elites who have a hand in this, but you're exposing everybody and giving them an opportunity to sort of take it forward.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
That's cool.
So when I think about sort of our learning early on, I highlight these as a couple of those. You know, one of the things I noted in our reality check was we really didn't have credibility as a digital company. And through the work that we did with the Digital Advisory Board, in addition to a number of other things we were doing, it really led us to be able to win some of those marquee clients, names that if I could say them, everybody on this call would recognize them. It really strengthened our understanding and knowledge so that it really did affect our organizational psyche and our confidence. You know, while we talk about the phrase digital as a disruptor, we were actually able to do it. And the digital transformation that became even stronger over the last 5 years has truly become a catalyst to some of the thinking, I think some of the behavior elsewhere in the organization. So it's been it, along with a number of other things that we were doing, I think have formed a great foundation for where we are today.
So talk about what some of these impacts specifically were. You say something more about that diversity as a catalyst.
I think there were, in some parts of our organization, this sense of if it's not built here, it's not going to work. And I think this really demonstrated whether it was the diversity of the advisory board itself in terms of the internal and external and lots of different experiences, how we brought others from the organization into these conversations, people who might be earlier in their career or very seasoned in parts of their career. It's like when you put people with different ideas and experiences together, innovation is going to result from that. And I think that was a really powerful experience for many people to have. Again, I think that spilled over into lots of other things that we've done. In fact, at Assurant, we see inclusion as one of our key enablers to our strategy and to our success.
Yeah. That's a huge culture change.
Yes.
From thinking of yourselves as the organization that has all the capabilities internally and can do things better than an external to being one that's open to. And can you? I love this business about building your organization's confidence to be able to operate. Like, say a little bit more about that.
We did one of the advisory board meetings that I remember. We had a team who was going to be pitching to one of those marquee clients come in and do their pitch. So here they are practicing their pitch in front of these advisory board members, the C-suite leaders internally, and these experts externally. It took a tremendous amount of courage, I think, for them to do it. But the way we facilitated the debrief and the conversation, they came away with some really important changes to how they were going to have that conversation with the prospect. And I think they learned too. It's like there's lots of different places to learn. This is one of them. They went into that pitch, I think, with a tremendous amount of confidence, an ability to really think differently about how they were going to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing in your model here of the Digital Advisory Board. It was a place for business leaders as well as sales teams to come up with ideas and kind of pressure test them with others externally who had been there before. It's like when you're going to be going into a situation, you just want to say it out loud once because it sounds so great in your head, but then when you actually say it, it doesn't come across quite as well. This was, an example of doing that. It's like, let's say it out loud a couple of times. Let's get some feedback. Let's do this to make it stronger. Yeah.
It wasn't about poking holes to make people feel bad. It was about noting strengths and filling gaps to make it stronger. And I think it was that was just one example of many powerful conversations that came out of that.
Yeah, that's great. So you're going to talk about lessons learned.
Yes. We've become pretty good at debriefing what we've learned and what we're going to carry forward. And I think some of the things on this slide really capture the essence of what we learned. That inside-out thinking has been, it proved it for us in that situation, and it's really been carried into lots of other places, whether it's outside of a function, outside of your business, outside of your organization. And I really think that it's led to people, and we've actually incorporated this idea of much more purposeful networking into some of our leadership development programs. I used a phrase with some folks, I said, maybe in the past I was sort of an accidental networker. I've tried to be much more purposeful because I really do believe that outside-in thinking is mutually beneficial.
Do you mean networker in the way that we think of it as being somebody who makes conversations during breaks at conferences or exchanges business cards? Or are we talking more about organizational networks, external networks? Say more about that.
I would say both.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to be going to a conference and you look at who's there, you can't talk to all 500 people who are there. Instead, be really clear about what am I going to this conference to learn? What might I be able to share? And be really purposeful about who you network with. So I think that's one part of it. I think your point is really well taken. Who are the organizations that we partner with? And how do we leverage their networks? One of the questions I've begun asking when I'm doing recruiting even is, so tell me about your network and tell me who the most powerful person is in your network, the most valuable person. Because it tells me a lot about, are they networking? Are they continually bringing that outside in? How are they contributing to their network to keep it strong? And what are they learning from? Because I think when we hire someone, we're not only hiring them, we're hiring access potentially to their network and ways to continue to strengthen this.
So that's a great question. It makes me ask myself that question, and maybe other people in our audience will be doing the same thing, thinking, who are the most powerful people in my network? And maybe I want to prepare that question for my next job interview.
There's all kinds of ways of learning, and the way that this digital advisory board, the meetings were set up, it was immersive learning. Not only did we have some meetings in our offices, but we also went to places where we had great access to different ways of thinking about things. We went, for example, to Silicon Valley, and as part of that, we went to some organizations there. We also had some startup company CEOs and leaders come in and pitch what they were doing to us. And it wasn't necessarily for us to invest in them, but it led to some conversations where that may have happened. It was just a really great way for us to get a sense of what are people doing, what are they thinking, and it really sort of, jogged our thinking in terms of where we were headed. And so that immersive learning was really important.
So because we're focused here on HR's role, I'm going to ask you a question you might need to think a moment about, but I'm interested. You talked about jogging your thinking by hearing, for example, startup executives come in and pitch to you. Were there any HR practices that you heard from these startups that you then thought, maybe we ought to be doing that? Are there ways in which your role as head of global talent management and development was sort of impacted in a way by what you heard?
I remember one. It was a manufacturing company, and one of the things they were talking about their turnover. And what they had done is, some of those jobs are not necessarily the most exciting thing and can actually really tax the body. So they had developed a rotation throughout the day. Nobody did the same job for more than 90 minutes. And they talked about the impact that it had on safety, on attention, on well-being, on health, on all kinds of things. And I thought, that's really a great idea. We hadn't thought about that before. And while many of our roles are more in a traditional sort of an office setting, we do have a number of facilities that are about repair and refurbishment of cell phones and other mobile devices. And so it really was, how can we think about that a little bit differently? So it was an idea that, again, it was, I should have thought about that, but I hadn't.
Yeah.
And so it was just one of those examples that made me go,
So it's kind of a job design job. Okay. Yeah.
I think the other big thing that particularly the startups of 1, 2, or 3 people taught us is about really thinking about where you want to place your bets. And as a company that's all about risk management, it also was, how can we leverage our knowledge of risk to be able to place bets wisely? That's been a big shift, I think, for us over the last 5 to 10 years too. So we're not only about, yes, minimizing risk, but also about being smart about risk.
So can you translate that to talent? How does figuring out where you want to place your bets translate to talent?
One thing I think about is, like many organizations, we really try to have a mix of both promoting internal talent as well as hiring external talent or partnering. And in some cases, I would say we have great knowledge of our internal talent. We've got some great people. but we also are really clear about what their strengths and what their areas for development are. And it is, we know so much about them, we know how we need to support them. Let's place a bet on promoting them into this role. They may not yet have 100% of the skills, capabilities, and areas of knowledge, but let's place a bet on this person. I think they will do well, and we really know what we need to do to support them. I think we've got a better balance of external hiring and internal promotions. We continue to work on that, but I think that's been one example of placing a bet.
So that kind of gets back to some of the cultural issues, which is many organizations tell us they have a culture of people avoiding mistakes. And you are a company whose business is risk management. So I would imagine that under those circumstances, people really want to avoid risks. And yet you're talking about putting people in positions that where they may not be immediately qualified. Do you have to sort of change the culture or send messages about, it's okay to make mistakes?
Yes.
And how do you do that?
I think it's by having those conversations. It's to, I think, making, and I'm just going to use the word visible, making it visible, not to make people feel badly about it, but how can we learn from that? Making a mistake once is actually a great way of learning, right? I mean, yes, you want it to go well, but sometimes it doesn't go as well as you'd hoped. You don't want the same person to make the same mistake 3 times. I'm not suggesting that, but I think there is great learning to see what didn't work as well as what did work. And like many other of the companies on this call, I think we've also realized that we often learn more when things don't go well than when they do go well. Again, we lean towards wanting things to go well, but let's not lose the opportunity to really leverage learning when things don't go as smoothly as we hoped.
Reminds me of a company I heard about that wanted to change its culture regarding it's okay to make a mistake, and they actually instituted a new award, and maybe it was given out quarterly, and the award was to the mistake we learned the most from.
I love that.
Yeah.
See, another idea. I'll take that one back.
Yeah, I think
it's
that's
true.
Great.
It's true. It takes, I think it takes a while to build both comfort with sharing it and then comfort with sort of publicizing it, but incredibly powerful when that is done well.
We heard a lot from companies in our research about the need to change recognition and rewards in some cases to support the kinds of new behaviors you're looking for.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
A couple of the other lessons learned is, so this outside-in thinking and immersive learning is great, but if we don't apply it in a way that helps us do things differently and deliver things differently for our clients and consumers, obviously we've missed an opportunity. And I think kind of to the point that you were saying, the last is about iterating, and evolution is natural and it's going to happen. I think oftentimes we wanted to have the first time be perfect. And we realize that it may take too long to make something perfect. By the time we've quote unquote made it perfect, we've actually missed the opportunity to do something, introduce something. We've missed an opportunity. And so whether you think about Agile in technology, whether you think about Agile and the Agile concepts in many other ways, I think as an organization, we're getting much better at comfort with iterating and recognizing it's not going to be perfect. The way that we get updates on our phones, for example, it's like we're getting releases and updates pretty consistently, right? Why not apply the same thing to what we're doing? I think that idea of iterating also gives people who are using, the recipients of it, a chance to provide feedback. And again, when they get that opportunity, they know that their thinking, their suggestions are a part of the next release. I think it also helps feed that kind of idea around continuous improvement.
Yeah, and engagement.
Yes.
Yeah, and a kind of empowerment too.
Yes, exactly. Both responsibility, right? It's your responsibility as a leader, as an employee in this organization to help us get better, and the access to be able to do that.
Yeah, opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So, so tell us about how the DAB is. So that was 5 years ago when you began.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think you have a snapshot of where the DAB is today.
Correct. So just as we also recognized that some of the levers, if you will, that we were using to help us continue to move on that digital maturity path also needed to change. So that first year, the expertise that we brought in was really pretty broad about helping us get smarter about digital transformation more broadly. As we learned, one of the foundational elements of our agreement with these external board members was, we're asking you to commit to being with us for a year. And after that, we would look at the kind of either renewing or thank you, your participation has been great. Now, because we wanted to keep the number of board positions small, we might need another area of expertise that that person doesn't possess. So every year to 18 months, we were looking at the advisory board composition and saying, all right, so where do we need more of now? And as you can see on this slide, we've moved from some more general sorts of perspectives on digital and digital transformation to some very specific areas where we felt we needed to learn more. And so AI was one of them. I know many companies are experimenting with AI, and we thought, gee, we too are experimenting with it. How can we learn, move faster, focus on those things that may be the best investments for our clients and consumers, as well as the organization from an efficiency standpoint? While we have a group called the Assurant Growth Investing group, we wanted to pay particular attention to what do we do in terms of growth investing for digital? And so we wanted to bring people with that kind of expertise to help shape some of the decisions that we were making. And so we just really felt, kind of to that iteration and evolution, we thought this applies to the Digital Advisory Board, it applies to what was the Growth Council, and now is the Assurant Growth Investing. So we've applied that idea of iteration and evolution in a number of the things that we're doing.
Doesn't growth investing mean external, internal, or both?
Typically, this would be external. So it might be a capability, it might be a company that we think is doing something really cool and we want to help them be successful. We'll get to learn along the way. In some cases, we may ultimately buy that company, but sometimes by the very decision of buying that company, we might unintentionally stifle the innovation that's happening in it. So if we've seen something really interesting that we think has benefit for Assurant and also benefit more broadly when you think about the consumer journey, we may choose to invest in it to help be that kind of accelerate their ability to grow and deliver. So it might be several $1 million. It might be other ways of providing support to some really interesting ideas, startups, and a little bit more advanced companies that we can help be successul.
So that's another form of, we said buy, build, or buddy. This is not just partnering, but in this case, investing.
Correct. I believe I was talking to a member of our strategy and growth team, and I believe the number is that we've invested in 14 companies, not just digital, but growth investing in 14 companies over the past 3 years, which may not sound like a lot to some of the folks on this call, but for us, we were typically doing full acquisitions in the past. We weren't doing either minority investments or growth investing like this. So when our current CEO came into the organization, Alan Kohlberg, one of the things that he felt very strongly about and really built our muscle around this was, yes, M&A has its place, growth investing also has its place. And so let's think about that sort of portfolio of opportunities for the many ways that we can grow.
That's an interesting distinction. And also it sounds like a capability your organization needs to develop is the ability to differentiate between when is it best to do growth investing versus acquisition.
Right. So that group has gotten a really, I think, a very sophisticated and rigorous model to think about what are the spaces we're looking at, who might the candidates be, who do we want to do some more research on, and then what, if any, might be a good decision for us to make as an organization. And so it too has come a long way.
So does that have any parallel in terms of talent? Is there a similar kind of assessment that you need to do within HR and with your business leaders? And is it best to make an acquisition of talent or to kind of invest in it externally?
I think that's absolutely the case. It is whether we hire the talent as a full-time employee or part-time employee, whether we are going to leverage the expertise of a contractor, whether we think about, gee, maybe this is the right solution here is temporary employees to do this. When might we partner with a consulting firm or an individual who can help us accelerate our growth. In fact, I was talking to our CHRO, our head of legal, our chief legal officer, and our chief marketing communications officer this morning about that very thing, and about being really thoughtful about what's the need, is it permanent or temporary, how might we best fill that need, and just thinking more broadly about the options in front of us.
So that's a perfect parallel. Yeah, it's your own growth investing.
Right, right. So as we looked at the current makeup of the Digital Advisory Board externally, we also thought about it internally. And that too has changed. You'll see a heavier emphasis as we think about technology, operations, and this growth strategy or digital strategy. So while I think that the C-suite leaders at Assurant will continue to learn and grow in this area, we also have moved from really moved into the operational aspects of this. And so I think the marriage of this particular external advisory board group as well as the internal advisory group, has been a great combination.
I'm noticing, though, a conspicuous omission, not omission, but I know you were, as CHRO of the particular business in the first TAB, you were part of the internal team, and I don't see HR represented here. So what was the reasoning there?
I think there's a couple of things, I guess I would say, and in fact, I've had a couple of conversations with our chief strategy officer a couple of times about this, but I think a couple of things. One, I mentioned earlier that one of the things we have gotten, I think, built our muscle more strongly around is understanding that business strategy is important, people strategy is as well. And I think many internal members of this digital advisory board now really understand those two pieces. Our HR group has an HR business partner who's partnered with these individuals. And so they are aware of some of this work going on. And so they also then have great partnerships and relationships with these advisory board members that can help it there. So HR may soon become, reappear as a member of this internal digital advisory board. But just because a member from HR isn't on here doesn't mean that HR is not involved. And again, I think in part it is because the leaders in the organization really are seeing that very important balance and complement in terms of developing strategy and executing on that strategy.
Yeah, so what I think is interesting here, which is so typical in digital transformation, is we're seeing a fluid organizational structure.
Yes.
That can morph over time in response to changing needs.
Yes.
Instead of being, established and sort of set in stone where it takes a tremendous effort to change the structure.
Right, right. I think you're right.
Yeah. Great. So,
one thing I wanted to say, so this has been sort of, I think over the last 5 years, we've done a number of things at Assurant that have helped build this foundation. And in late 2016, Assurant did a study around consumer expectations, and it was published in early 2017. I pulled a couple of slides from that deck because I thought it could be just a good snapshot to say, yes, we've come a long way, but guess what? Consumer expectations aren't slowing down. And so as you can see in this slide, what we did is we surveyed about 2,400 people, I believe it was, for this survey. And we asked them a number of questions about how their customer experience at a number of companies influenced what they would expect of a company like us. And you can see on this slide, 90% think that the experience with companies that are noted here, these were ones that were mentioned many times, and these are all pretty familiar names to all of you. 90% think the experience with these companies raises their expectations for other similar companies. And what was really important for us is 83% think that experience with those companies raises their expectations for all companies they interact with, not only for ones that operate in the same industry.
Yeah.
And so if any of us don't think that people's experience at Amazon, at Google, at Apple, et cetera, aren't influencing, even if you're not in that space, you're wrong. And so I think that just reminds us of how important it is that we continue to evolve the consumer and customer experience. They expect it, and I think this research demonstrated that was so. So if anyone needed a little push in terms of the sense of urgency, I thought this might be a great slide near the end of our conversation today.
It is also, I think, relevant for any industry. Because we've heard companies that are in entirely different industries saying our competitors aren't X, our traditional competitor, it's Amazon, for setting the bar and people's expectations.
Yep. And I would think people on this call too, how many times have you thought it? You may have a particular experience and you go, that was a wow. And you do. We have the same expectation for any organization that we are now dealing with through our mobile devices and other ways that we might access a service or a product.
Yeah. So were you going to talk about this next slide about new baseline across different industries, or?
I think it kind of builds on what I was saying in that I just think it means that customers' expectations are continuing to grow. And even, when I showed that slide in the beginning about the digital maturity path and said, we are here, I think what this also reinforces is just because you're here now, if you don't keep moving at a very planful and accelerated pace, we're not going to keep up with consumer expectations. Yeah. And so this was meant as sort of an affirmation of that.
Yeah.
And just, I doubt that anybody on this call is complacent or comfortable with where they are. But when we did this research, it just reinforced for us more, how can we continue to make a difference in the experience that our customers have?
Yeah, it's all a moving target.
Yes.
So this business of digital transformation is not an endpoint.
Correct.
Technology will continue to evolve.
Yes.
Capabilities that companies need to build in order to leverage it will change, and customers' expectations will continue to evolve.
Exactly.
Yeah. I like that example a lot, and I agree. I think it's generalizable to. So in our research on what's HR's role in digital transformation, we came up with a list of things that we learned from a variety of companies, including Assurant. And the first couple of things, or the first thing is one you've talked a lot about, the DAB helped you do, which is doing that deep dive in digital transformation. The beauty being that you can do it simultaneously with your peers, your other C-suite peers, which I think turns you into sort of co-learners. I mean, it's great for reinforcing HR's leadership role.
Yes.
We talked about changing culture, for example, around making mistakes. We've talked about not so much about reimagining organizational design, although we've talked quite a bit about that in our previous research. And then we have a bunch of things that are, you might think of very traditional HR responsibilities. So you might say, hey, HR has always needed to develop leadership models and to assess talent supply and to close the gap and et cetera. So what for you as an HR professional, what was different about being an HR leader in a company that was undergoing digital transformation?
When I look at all of these things, I'd say, yes, this is the role of HR. When I think about some of the big leaps forward, one that stands out for me is about creating a new leadership model. I think in the past, it was sort of this idea that, the senior leader is sort of all-knowing and he or she is going to come up with the vision, come up with the strategy, and come up with the plan, and introduce that to his or her team, and the team's going to execute on it. And what we've learned, I think what's been reinforced, particularly over the last 5 years, but it certainly began a little bit before that, is absolutely, the leader needs to have an idea and to have a sense of that vision and sense of that strategy. But what we found so powerful with this is having a great idea and inviting others to make it better was incredibly powerful. But it was a bit of a, I remember one leader in particular said to me, Carrie, you're going to have me stand up in front of this group of 50 people and say, so here's my start on our vision, on our strategy and the plan. Join me in making it better. And I said, yes, that's what I'm asking you to do. And after this particular workshop that we did with him and his leaders, it was amazing how far we got, the amount of energy in the room, the amount of alignment and understanding that was created by that very rich conversation. And so that's just one example, I think, of this. I also think on our original digital advisory board, our CEO of that division was a member of the advisory board. He was there to learn too. And I think that was a real powerful message to the rest of our organization. Him, as well as the other C-suite leaders, we're all here to learn. And again, I think being members, not facilitating it, but being members and learners was really a powerful message.
Yeah. And have you done anything yet to sort of align let's say, your performance criteria with this new leadership model?
Yes. So let's see, about 3 years ago, we developed what we saw as the role of the Assurant leader. Prior to that, we had, I think if you would ask somebody in one of our offices in the UK, somebody in an office in Miami, and someone in an office in China, what's the role of a leader at Assurant? You probably you would have received as many different responses to that question as people that you spoke with. And we thought it was really important to be able to say the role of the Assurant leader is really about engagement, growth, and performance. How do you engage with your team to help them see the bigger picture, for example? How do you help them understand their role in delivering on that? How do you know them well enough to understand what their aspirations are and how you can help them grow and develop in a way that then helps our company, our team, our function be more successful? And so as we stated that role of a leader, we've also either shifted or developed programs that then help leaders be more effective in delivering on that expectation. Our goal is not to take away people's personality or anything like that, but to be very clear about here are the expectations for the role. Now, in your way, do that with your team. So that's been a really powerful shift. And some of, I think, the experience with this helped shape the role of Assurant leader. But we didn't develop only within HR. We actually engaged leaders from across the organization to say, what's really important, what's really unique, what's really powerful about the role of a leader at Assurant.
So is that reflected at all in people's performance goals or in their rewards?
In their performance plans, we actually have the how to do a self-assessment and get feedback on engage, grow, and perform. What are you doing well? What are you trying to do more of? Both self-assessment as well as feedback from your manager. So we've built that into our performance plans. There's a section of 70% of the, we still do ratings, but 70% of that is based on the goals and goal accomplishment, the what, if you will, and then 30% of it is based on the how, which is the engage, grow, perform behaviors.
I see, yeah, okay. So that's really putting the rubber to the road.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for you, as an HR professional, which one of these, where did you personally, professionally, was it the biggest stretch for you, the most out of your comfort zone?
I think in some ways, the deep dive into digital transformation, it wasn't okay for me to say, oh, so-and-so knows all about that. I really was expected to know and understand much more about digital transformation than I did at the beginning. And so it flexed for me a little bit different muscle. And I think where I was paying attention certainly was around digital transformation as it relates to HR and the systems and apps that we might leverage, but thinking much more broadly about the organization's ability to deliver for the customer and our consumers. So I think that was probably a big stretch for me. And I know one of the things that we were talking earlier about is while we've got many leaders who not only thrive on change, but actually drive change, there were some that weren't quite so comfortable with that. And so it was helping people see that that change was actually going to be certainly interesting, hopefully a little bit of fun, and I think be really engaging with those around them. So I think working with leaders, the example that I shared earlier, I think working with some leaders who it was a little bit of a toe in the water before fully jumping in.
Yeah, it sounds like your knowing about where you were headed as a company digitally, what this meant in terms of strategy, would also be helpful in coaching leaders in those new behaviors. You said something I think is really important I wanted to underscore, and you said you were used to thinking about what digital's impacts were within HR in terms of efficiency, effectiveness. But the stretch for you was in thinking about how it was going to change the business model, the strategy, what you're going to deliver to your customers. And my observation is that often in conversations with HR leaders, I know that people are really interested in how digital technology can change how HR does its work. But this is really something bigger.
Yep. When I was sharing the data about the consumer research that we did, well, to me, that also applies to our employees because our employees are consumers as well. So when I think about the experience that we're working to improve for our customers, employees are buying on Amazon. So employees have the same expectation of what will be available to them at work and the ease at which they can do things as a consumer of other organizations. And so we've really been keen on thinking about how do we make the employee experience on par with the experience we're trying to drive for our customers. And that's not an easy place to get, but again, our employees are consumers too, and they have that expectation of the technology, the ease with which they can do their jobs, but also do things related to HR.
So I'm hearing a sort of, I don't know if you call it, not bicultural, but sort of bi-focus is you have to think about how digital transformation changes employees' expectations and how you can deliver things to them, but also be thinking about what this means for the business, the industry, and the company's external customers.
That's correct.
Yeah.
We do not run out of things to do we?
No, but also I think this is, this makes it a very stimulating and fast-paced world to be operating in.
Yes.
And the good news is you weren't playing catch-up. You were right there in the front row seat. So I think that's a very important thing. And I would imagine that there are viewers who are thinking, well, lucky for Carrie Bongard, but how do I get there? Because that was it was a very advantageous opportunity you had. So back to our research for just a moment. So based on these interviews, we identified what were the skills and competencies that were new or that were really critical to HR's effectiveness in digital transformation. Once again, we come back to that deep knowledge of digital transformation. And I have to say, it's not like once and done. Oh, I get it now. Now I move on. But since this stuff is constantly changing, it means being aware at all times of what's happening in the environment. Having curiosity, we talked about being a sort of avid learner, somebody who doesn't get by on what they already know, but what they're curious about finding out more about. Prowess in using data and analytics. We heard this again and again from chief digital officers in terms of what do you want from an HR leader. Top of their list, one of the top things on the list was the ability to use data and analytics to help us deliver insights so we could make better business decisions. And the flexibility and openness to change is the kind of thing that you talked about inculcating in your overall leadership model, that things are not going to be the same, and you cannot be somebody who's rigidly clinging to the ways you've always done things. The skills in OD and OE, change management, is you're going to be a key person in helping decide how culture needs to change, how structure might need to change, how all the HR systems might need to change to reinforce that. And then the courage to challenge the status quo is about, and again, we heard this from chief digital officers as much as we did from HR people, is we depend on HR leaders to tell us what will work, what won't work, what's getting in the way, what sorts of investments we need to make in order to achieve our vision or our strategy. So I would love to ask you again for yourself, speaking personally as an HR leader, what was the biggest learning for you, or the area where you had the biggest developmental challenge? Or
I think the first and the last of these bullets really stood out for me in my own personal learning. I'm also thinking, no matter where a company is in this, I think doing kind of an assessment of, so where are we strong and where do we have the most room to grow? It's easy to sort of lament where you're not. I think that understanding the gaps is important, but I also think, take stock of where you are. One of the things my team and I always talk about is go where the energy is. And it's like where you've been making some progress and you've got motivation, you've got some openness to change. It's like go there and really, really start building. I would say too, when you have a recognition of where the gaps are, I'd say think creatively about how you can close those. Again, if everything is about we have to do this ourselves, you're not probably going to make the same speed. You're not going to close those gaps as quickly as your customers probably need you to.
Yes.
And even your employees want you to. And so I think doing the assessment, understanding where the gaps are, taking stock of where you've got some energy, and then thinking creatively about how you can close those gaps in a way that is going to meet your customers' needs. I think all those things are really important.
So this is about innovation meets HR in some ways.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So sadly, we are out of time, but I want to wrap up by giving you this slide in which we have hot links to our reports on digital transformation, including this one on what's the role of HR, and one that will be coming out in October on what does it take to lead digital transformation. I also want to encourage you to fill out our evaluation. We read all those comments, and if we didn't get a chance to get to your question this morning, we'll follow up afterwards and tell you about next month's Human Capital Watch, which will be on executive compensation. And this looks like a great group of presenters, and encourage you to join us for that. Here are some links to some other resources that might be useful to you. And then finally, you'll be hearing from us shortly with a very short evaluation. And we really look at those comments and scores. And you will also have the opportunity to download and share if you'd like. You can watch this webcast on demand or share it with your teammates. So thank you very much. Thank you, Carrie. It's been great hearing this story. And thank you all for joining us for this webcast. I hope you have a very good day.